Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Welcome back to another Seed to Harvest session. Last day, can you believe it?
Yeah.
We made it to the last day. So today's going to be a full day. We've got a great group of people on here already. And once again, we are going to launch off here with a giveaway. And this time, what I want you to write in the chat is the word water. Water, 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 water. One of the things that your garden needs is water. And the giveaway today is actually from our guest speaker, Audrey Crawford. And she is going to be giving away her course on effortless irrigation. And so this walks through irrigation parts, learning how to automate watering systems in the garden, a whole course walking you step by step through all about how to water your garden and set up those watering systems. So some special person is going to win the giveaway. As you're putting in those waters into the chat, I'm going to do a little shout out to our sponsor, which today's sponsor is Bootstrap Farmer. And we don't have a video for them today, but we do have I'm going to pull up their website. And Bootstrap Farmer is your go-to solution for all things seed starting, trays, pots. In fact, their store has a whole bunch of other stuff as well: microgreens trays, cell trays, seed starting kits, but then they also have greenhouses, green plastic greenhouse kits, and you can get a lot of their products directly from within the Seed Time store. So you can head on over to the Seed Time store and grab their products there as well. And coming up soon, there's going to be a special session from them on actual seed starting. So shout out to them. All right, let's do our giveaway. I'm going to pull up our giveaway tool and ready, 3, 2, 1. And let's see, who is the winner? Dun, dun, dun. Winning this course on watering,
John McGill.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, John.
All right. Please email support@seedtime.us. We'll make sure that you get access to Audrey's course on watering. Huge congratulations. All right. Now we are going to introduce our guest speaker for this morning. Audrey is a lifelong gardener, founder of Audrey's Little Farm in California's Central Valley. She is in Zone 9B, and her skills are rooted in 3 generations of family farming. And then she has refined those skills through hands-on experience in the garden herself. She has a deep passion for gardening and self-sufficiency, and she likes to break down complex gardening concepts into easy, actionable steps. So we're super excited to have her with us, and she's going to be great at empowering you in your garden this morning, especially when it comes to growing tomatoes.
Yeah, all about tomatoes.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks, Audrey, for joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to talk all about tomatoes.
Well, we are very excited to have you. And just before I forget, to everyone in the chat, feel free to ask questions as we go along, because once again, we are going to have a short Q&A time at the end. Otherwise, Audrey, we're ready to turn it over to you and let you take it away.
All right, perfect. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome. Today, I'm so excited to talk about tomatoes. They're one of my most favorite crops in the garden. And so let's get started. All right, we're going to be going over all of the different types of tomatoes and which ones are best to grow for various purposes and climates. We'll be diving deep into the process of growing tomatoes for a successful harvest. And lastly, we're going to be ending with photos of my tomato crops from the last 6 years. I've had some failures and successes along the way. And as we look back over those photos, you'll be able to see my mistakes and hopefully fast track your success to a better tomato crop. All right, so if we haven't met, real quick, my name is Audrey Crawford. I'm in the Central Valley of California, and I have the site audreyslittle.farm.com. I'm a 4th-generation farmer, wife, and mom, and I've always had such a huge passion for gardening, which is why I'm so incredibly blessed to have this online business where I can help others. So I thought it would be fun to start off showing you what's possible and then working through the steps of how to actually make it happen in your garden. Because just like cooking, we don't usually get inspired by looking at written steps. We get inspired by looking at this beautiful picture of the finished dish, and then we're inspired to put in the effort. So let's start here. This was a photo taken on November 14th of 2024. This last year was my most successful crop ever. And by seeing these photos, I hope you're inspired because this can be your garden too. If I would have saw this picture 6 years ago, I never would have thought this could have happened. And so the thing is, if I would have known probably today what I knew 5 years or what I didn't know 5 years ago, it might have happened a bit faster. So before we actually dive into how to grow tomatoes, let's get comfortable with some of the tomato basics. Think of this as your Tomatoes 101 crash course. We'll cover some key terms and different types of plant or tomato plants that you'll run into along your gardening journey. First off, we have the different types of plants. So you've likely heard the terms heirloom and hybrid. We've got three main players in the tomato world: open pollinated, heirloom, and hybrid plants. And the reason why this is important is really what you want to achieve in your garden. If you want to be saving seeds, then you're going to want those open pollinated and heirloom varieties. If you want to have plants that grow a little bit easier in extreme temperatures, like I do here in the Central Valley, I really want those tomato plants to thrive through the heat and the harsh conditions of summer. And in that case, hybrids are my best friend. So let's talk about open pollinated really quick. These are pollinated by our friends, the bees, birds, even the wind. And here's the cool part. When you plant their seeds next year, you get the same exact plant of that parent plant. But a fascinating thing about tomatoes is that they are actually self-pollinating. Unlike most vegetables, tomatoes can pollinate themselves because they've got both the male and female parts, which is really cool. And then next up, we have heirlooms. And these are like the family antiques of the tomato world. They're open pollinated varieties with fascinating histories passed down through generations. And funny enough, there's actually no official definition of what really makes a tomato an heirloom. Some folks say it has to be 50 years or older. Others say differently. But I will be honest, from my years of experience growing heirlooms, they are a little bit harder to grow. They are more prone to disease, and sometimes they just don't give you as many tomatoes. There's been years in the past where I've grown heirlooms and I've gotten 0 tomatoes. But there are some heirlooms that I love to grow, like the San Marzano tomato. They are fantastic for making sauce. And when they work out, they're great. But then there's other years where they hardly produce. So it's kind of hit and miss. And then last but not least, let me tell you about my personal favorite, the hybrid tomato. Think of these as the best of both world tomatoes. They're created by crossing 2 different tomatoes to get the best qualities of both. And let me clear up a common myth. Hybrids are not genetically modified. They're just naturally bred for awesome traits like disease resistance and better yields. The only catch is that you have to buy your seeds each year to ensure that you get the exact variety. My absolute favorites to grow are these gorgeous sun gold cherry tomatoes shown in the photo, early girls, and better boys. So if you live in a hot climate like I do here in Zone 9, I would definitely consider these 3 varieties. They always do really well for us. And now let's cover another important distinction between tomato plants, which is determinate versus indeterminate plants. We'll start with determinate. These are often called bush tomatoes. They grow to a predetermined height and give you most of their fruit all at once. What's really cool about determinates is that they're usually a bit earlier to mature, and so you might get a harvest sooner than you would with other varieties. And if you're working with limited space or love container gardening, these are your go-to plants. And the last bonus is that they're pretty low maintenance when it comes to support and pruning. You don't have to do much. Next, and speaking of the determinates, one of my favorite determinates are Roma tomatoes, and they are perfect for canning and making salsa. When it comes to making sauce, you're going to need way more tomatoes than you'd think, and so it's really nice to get a really big harvest all at once. The photo shown here is a harvest off of just 6 tomato plants. This was the first harvest of the season, and we got 70 pounds of tomatoes from those 6 plants. So it was a perfect amount for making a good batch of sauce. So if you're planning to preserve, determinate varieties are definitely the way to go. You get that big, beautiful harvest all at once. Or if you're growing in smaller spaces or containers, they're a great choice. And now let's talk about indeterminates. These are the marathon runners of the tomato world. They just keep growing and producing throughout the season. Take a look at this photo here. This is just one sun gold cherry tomato plant growing up our cattle panel arch. These plants definitely need good support because they can get huge. And we'll be diving in later on to different support methods, but just remember with indeterminates, a tall and sturdy support system is best. All right, to show you just how big they get, check out these before and after photos. The first shot on the left was taken on June 27th, and the second one is from November 14th. And what I absolutely love about indeterminate varieties is that they allowed us to enjoy fresh tomatoes for 6 months straight. And now that we've covered the different types of tomato plants, I want to cover some of my most favorite varieties and reasons for growing tomatoes, because sometimes I think we can all really get caught up in the end result of producing a successful harvest. And if it doesn't happen, we feel like we failed. But gardening is more than just growing food. It's an incredible journey that gives you more time outdoors. It's a great way to spend time with your kids, and each season is a learning opportunity. And so even if you can grow just one piece of fruit at home, it's going to be better than anything you could ever buy at a store. And that is always something to really be proud of. So did you know that the majority of store-bought tomatoes are picked when they are green and then treated with ethylene gas to ripen them? And despite the fact that these tomatoes are terrible and are less nutritious for you, let me start that over. Okay, so I feel like store-bought tomatoes taste terrible, but they are also less nutritious. And so to have the highest level of nutrients, they need to be picked when they're ripe. And that is not the case with store-bought. So if you can grow tomatoes in your own backyard, you're feeding your family such higher quality produce than you could ever buy for them at a store. And so simply knowing that homegrown tomatoes are more nutritious is a great reason to grow them. But the big why for my family and I is just because they taste so good. Once you have homegrown tomatoes, you just can't go back to store-bought. And I know a lot of times you hear of others who set big goals of being completely self-sufficient. And while I think that is incredible, it's not realistic for a lot of us. But that doesn't mean I don't feel that everyone needs to learn to grow their own food, at least even if that's just a few tomatoes, because that is doable for everyone. We can all grow something. It might be just some herbs in the windowsill, but it's more than a lot of people. So pick a crop that you really love. And if it's something your family also loves to consume, that is even better. All right, so there are so many great ways to use tomatoes. When it comes to other veggies like squash, cucumbers, we often get kind of tired of them by the end of the season, but that is never the case for tomatoes. You can make the best BLT you'll ever have. You can make bruschetta. You can make homemade spaghetti sauce and salsa. And then one of my new favorites that I started making is what I like to call sheet pan salsa. I just pick whatever is ripe in the garden. There's no recipe. Usually it's a combination of various peppers, tomatoes, and tomatillos. Then I cut up onion and garlic, throw everything on a sheet pan and roast it in the oven for about 10 minutes. Then I throw it all into the blender with some spices, and it turns out incredible. Each time it's a little bit different. Sometimes it's spicier depending on what peppers we use, but it's a really great way to use up things in your garden, and it's so simple. And while any variety of tomatoes that you grow is going to taste better than the store, there are certain varieties that are better suited for specific climates, and certain varieties are better for different purposes. For example, sauce tomatoes versus slicing tomatoes. So on the upper left, we have Roma tomatoes, which are considered a paste tomato. Paste tomatoes have a dense, meaty flesh. They have less moisture and fewer seeds, which makes them really great for making sauces and salsa because they don't get watered down. A few common paste varieties include Romas, San Marzanos, and Amish paste. Then you have slicing tomatoes that are medium to large, juicy, and often round. A few of my favorites that grow exceptionally well for us here in the Central Valley are Better Boys, Early Girls, and Beefmasters. The upper right-hand picture shows Better Boy tomatoes growing on the plant. They ended up being some of my largest tomatoes this year. Then on the bottom right photo is a Beefmaster on the left compared to an Early Girl on the right. And then on the bottom left is the Sun Gold cherry tomato, which is one of my favorite cherry tomatoes. They're a hybrid, but they grow really, really well. And so when it comes time to choosing what types of tomatoes you grow, I believe the most important thing to do is grow what works good for you and your climate. And you're really going to learn this by talking to other local gardeners. Where I am in California, the summers are hot with many 100 plus degree days, but we don't have high humidity, which is a plus and helps with tomato growing. But hybrid tomatoes always outperform heirlooms. And so mostly I just grow a lot of hybrids. For example, San Marzanos are an heirloom. And I think I mentioned earlier, sometimes they grow well, but some years they don't. So I always plant them because there's a good chance I might get a good crop, but I don't want to be left high and dry with no tomatoes if they don't perform well. So I always add in lots of hybrids. Other heirlooms for example, like the black creme tomato has never produced well. So I grew it for a few years in a row. It never grew well for us, so I quit growing it. And then consider your end purpose. So if your end goal is to make a big batch of sauce, definitely consider growing some paste tomatoes, but you can always use a good slicing tomato for basically everything. All right, and now we're going to cover everything you need to know to grow amazing tomatoes, from picking the perfect spot to plant, deciding whether to start seeds or buy starter plants, how to care for your tomatoes, and lots of exciting other tips and tricks. So first off, let's just do a high-level overview of what tomato plants need. First up is sunshine, 6 to 8 hours minimum of direct sun. Morning sun is your best friend because it helps dry off any overnight dew on the leaves, which helps prevent fungal issues. And if you live somewhere super hot, the afternoon shade can be a lifesaver. When it comes to soil, think not too wet, not too dry. You don't want soil that drains so fast that you need to water multiple times per day, but you definitely don't want heavy clay soil that stays sopping wet either. But tomato plants do like to have consistent moisture around their roots. The next thing your tomatoes need is plenty of nutrients, ideally from healthy soil with lots of organic matter, but not too much nitrogen. And as a quick side note, throughout this presentation, we'll be coming back to the term healthy soil. And to be honest, as I was creating this presentation, I was trying to figure out a way to condense what it means to have healthy soil and how to accomplish that in your garden. But it could truly be an entire presentation on its own, or an entire day, which was earlier on this week at the Seed to Harvest Summit. There were so many incredible experts earlier on this week that talked about soil health. And so I definitely recommend watching the replays from all of those presentations. I'll be sharing some of the best tips I've learned and how I'm applying it in my garden, but I definitely recommend watching the replays because there's such a wealth of knowledge or a wealth of tips that I learned from speakers earlier on this week. Okay, and now we're going to go into, so now that we know where you're going to grow your tomatoes, sorry, I said that wrong. And now, before we go deeper, you need to decide where you're going to grow your tomatoes. Your growing space will help you determine what varieties are best for you, because if you only have a really small space, you might not really want to grow an indeterminate variety that gets really big. If you can only grow in containers, you're going to have better success with determinates. So your first option for growing is directly in the ground. This is my personal favorite because it gives roots plenty of room to spread out and find nutrients. And don't stress if your soil isn't perfect. So many gardeners start in containers or raised beds simply because they feel like their soil isn't great. But here's a little secret. The best way to improve your soil is to just start growing in it. Plants are amazing at helping build better soil over time. So even if you decide to plant a few tomatoes in containers and raised beds, I still recommend planting some tomatoes directly in the ground as well, because over time, as your soil improves, your in-ground tomatoes are likely going to grow a little bit better. Next up, we have container growing. This is perfect for the patio gardeners, but here's the thing about containers. Size matters a lot. Think bigger than you might expect. You want a minimum 15-gallon container, which is about 1.5 cubic feet of soil per tomato plant. Even better would be a half wine barrel size that holds about 20 to 25 gallons of soil. A common mistake I see gardeners making all the time is cramming multiple tomatoes into one container. But trust me on this one. One healthy, happy plant will give you way more tomatoes than 3 crammed ones. So if you're really tight on space, you can even look into varieties that are bred specifically for containers like the Patio Princess, Tiny Tim, or Bush Goliath. And then the third option is growing in raised beds. You get great drainage and control over your soil, plus more growing space than containers. A good sized raised bed can usually handle about 2 to 3 tomato plants, but just remember to not overcrowd them. And now you have to decide whether you're going to start your seeds or buy transplants. So if you're starting seeds, you get access to so many more amazing varieties. It's also super cost effective because a packet of seeds usually costs the same or less than one starter plant. Plus, if you do it right, you will likely end up with stronger, healthier plants. But if you're short on time or if it's getting late in the season, there's absolutely no problem with buying transplants. Both approaches can give you a great harvest. So whether you have your own seedlings ready to transplant or transplants from a local nursery, let's go over when and how to plant. The first thing to know is that timing is crucial. Wait until all danger of frost is past. Don't just trust your average last frost dates either. check your actual forecast. I know for us here in the Central Valley, we have had a much cooler spring the last few years. And even though our last frost date is March 15th, I've been holding out until the end of April because we've still been having occasional freezes throughout March the last few years and even early April. And so it's better to be a little bit late than too soon, I feel like. And so ideally you want your nighttime temperatures in the 50s and above and your daytime temps in the 70s and above. And here's one of the really cool things about planting tomatoes. When you plant them deep, they actually grow roots all along their stems. So I usually plant them right up to that first set of leaves. You can even remove the bottom leaves and plant them deeper. Some gardeners dig a trench and lay the plant sideways. That totally works too. In the photo shown, I'm planting up to that bottom leaf, but I could have gone a little bit deeper if I removed that branch, but it just helps establish a stronger root system and the plants grow really well. And then now let's talk about tomato plant spacing. This is probably the biggest mistake I see gardeners make. I know it's tempting to just squeeze in one more plant, but here's the truth. One happy plant with lots of space to grow is going to grow a lot better than squished ones. So you don't want tomato plants stressed. For the specifics, if you're growing indeterminate varieties vertically, give them at least 3 feet between plants and 4 feet between rows. In my garden, I go with 4 feet all around. Determinate types can be a bit closer with 2 feet in between plants and 3 feet between rows. And keep in mind that this is mostly for the competition of sunshine. So depending on how you prune your plants, or if you have a really sunny spot, you might be able to get away with closer spacing. But if you have a shadier area, or if you're not managing the size of your plant, more room is always better. And now let me show you how this plays out over a season. So if you take a look at this photo here, at planting time, I planted 4 feet apart, and it looks like a ton of space between plants. It kind of seems like you're wasting space. But then by June 6th, they're starting to fill in. By late June, they still have plenty of space, but the branches are beginning to grow into one another. And by August, the plants are 6+ feet tall and thriving with minimal space in between each plant. All right, and now after planting, it's watering time. So I have my tomatoes set up on an irrigation system, and I like to water for about 5 to 10 minutes at planting time, let it soak in, and then give it another 5-minute watering. Think of it like this. Dry soil is like a dry sponge. It needs to be a little bit wet before it can really soak up the water. And that is why it's important to not let your soil completely dry out between waterings, because a little moisture helps that next watering soak in. So at transplanting time, I give them a really good watering. And then remember, if you're growing in containers or raised beds, they're going to dry out faster. And so you're likely going to need to water more frequently. And now let's talk about supporting tomatoes. The support system you choose really depends on your tomato type and how you plan to prune. But the first common method I often see gardeners use is tomato cages. And in my opinion, they're pretty much useless for tomatoes. You can use them for your pepper plants or very small determinate type tomatoes, but they're really not that useful for larger tomatoes because they quickly outgrow the cage and they just fall over anyway. And then the next common option that can work is stakes, but they do have some limitations. They're best for plants pruned to 1 or 2 stems, but here's the catch. Your tomatoes will likely outgrow them as well. And so unless you're growing in a high tunnel and you're using the string method and keeping those plants supported, a stake can kind of be a little bit difficult to manage as well. And then, this was my garden a few years ago. I used to use T-posts with 3 strands of wire, and it worked sort of, but once the plants reached that top wire, they would just either flop over or stop growing upward. And so it was kind of a mess. And then we finally built this cattle panel arch, and it has been a game changer. It is hands down the best support system I've ever used. It's super sturdy. It's easy to tie plants to. And as a bonus, the plant can keep growing up and over for maximum production. But if you don't have space for an arch like in the previous photo, you can still actually use cattle panels and just put them up vertically like shown in this photo. It would provide a really sturdy support. It's going to take up less room. And you can also use it for other climbing plants like green beans, peas, and cucumbers. So whatever support system you choose, the next tip is to tie up your plants regularly. I do it weekly or at least every other week. It's so much easier to do often than to wrestle with overgrown plants. So I like to go out at least weekly and just tie up the branches as I see them. I use natural jute because it breaks down at the end of the season, which makes cleanup really nice. You can even just toss it into your compost pile. And remember to not tie too tight because the stems are going to get thicker as they grow. And now let's talk about watering throughout the season. So it's one thing to water your plants thoroughly at planting time, but consistent watering throughout the entire season is crucial for healthy tomatoes. The magic word here is consistent. Deep, consistent watering encourages deep roots, and it helps prevent common tomato issues like splitting and blossom end rot. So keep the soil moist, not soaking, and water deeply. The average tomato roots can be 1 to 3 feet deep, and so you want to make sure you're getting water down to that root zone. And then it's best to water at the base of the plant and try to keep the leaves dry, which is another reason why I love irrigation. The emitters just drip right at the base of the plant and there's no overhead spray. But I know that watering can be a complicated topic that's hard to find an exact answer to because there are lots of variables. You can't just tell somebody to water for X amount of minutes, every so many days, because it's going to depend on your climate, your soil, your growing method. And so you just have to really test this, figure out what works for you. Go out and actually feel the soil. If it still feels really moist, you could probably skip watering. Anyways, that's why I really like the drip irrigation. So right here, I kind of show my setup. So I run a main line along my tomatoes with adjustable emitters at each plant. So I like this method because then you can control exactly how much each plant is getting. Sometimes you might have a plant that dies throughout the season and you might take it out. So then you can shut that water off versus something like a soaker hose that just gives everything the same amount. That's not always needed. So I love these adjustable emitters at each tomato plant. And then the next important thing is to adjust your frequency throughout the season. So for young plants, I typically run the drip irrigation for about 5 minutes daily, sometimes every other day. As they grow, I increase to about 10 minutes per day. And then by the end of the season, I'm usually going anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes every few days. But like I said, you really just have to test this yourself. And remember, as plants get bigger, roots go deeper. When they're small, the roots are more shallow. And so sometimes more frequent, shorter water frequency is better. So if I could just give you one tip, it would be to automate this if you can, because it's going to save you so much time, but it's also going to allow you to have that consistent watering schedule. I could tell you if I had to go out by hand and actually water all of my tomato plants, it would never get done. Our garden is big. I have a 2-year-old son, life is busy. And so automating watering is a lifesaver. And now let's talk about mulch. So mulching is important with all plants, but it's really important with tomatoes. My go-to choices are shredded leaves from fall. It's something we have an abundance of. And so it's just a, efficient way to use them up. It's free. Another option is straw, but there's lots of different, options for mulch out there. So I don't really think you could go wrong. A common mistake I see, though, is just applying a really super thin layer and then wondering why the weeds still come up. You need to apply a thick 4 to 6 inch layer to really do the job. And good mulch is going to help keep the moisture in. It's going to keep the roots cool, block weeds. And then as that mulch slowly breaks down, it feeds your soil. And now let's tackle pruning. And boy, is this a hot topic in the tomato or in the gardening world, just in general, especially tomatoes. So first thing first, if you live in a really hot climate, take it from me and don't make the mistake of over pruning, because it's probably going to stress out your plants and they're not going to grow very well. So I'll show you some photos later on in this presentation, but the reason less pruning is typically better is because that extra foliage protects the fruit. And so you're not going to get sun scald on your fruit, and less pruning is also less stressful. But the one thing I do recommend for everyone is to remove the bottom leaves that touch the soil. This helps prevent disease and improves airflow around the base of the plant. And then what to do about those suckers, the shoots that grow between the main stem and leaf branches. There's a lot of debate about removing them, but in most cases, I say let them grow, because each sucker you leave means more fruit that you're going to get on your plants. But here are some of the cases for when you might want to prune more. So first is if your plants are too crowded and branches are, growing into one another, though better spacing to begin with would be the real solution. If you're growing single stem tomatoes, then pruning is necessary. Or if you're in a cold climate with a short growing season, pruning off the suckers earlier on in the season can make the other fruits mature faster. Here are some reasons why you should not prune. So first, You shouldn't prune determinate types. Just remove the bottom leaves at planting and let them grow. In hot climates, the extra foliage is going to help protect your fruit, so minimal pruning is often better. And then lastly, like I mentioned, pruning can be stressful, so the less stress you can, or if you can just go without stressing your plants, that's often going to be better too. And now let's talk about some common tomato troubles. So first up, we have tomato splitting and cracking. And this happens when the fruit grows faster than its skin can stretch. It's usually from inconsistent watering or big temperature swings. And while we can't control the weather, consistent watering and good mulch can help prevent this. So in my garden, even with consistent 100+ degree temperatures, splitting was rarely an issue due to the steady watering and mulch. And then next up, the dreaded blossom end rot, that dark sunken spot on the bottom of tomatoes. And here's what's really happening. So blossom end rot is a calcium uptake issue, meaning that even if calcium is present in the soil, the plant is not able to absorb and transport it properly. This can be due to various factors such as inconsistent watering, pH that is too high, high levels of phosphorus, excessive nitrogen, or other stress factors. The important thing to realize is that it does not necessarily mean a calcium deficiency in the soil, but there is a calcium deficiency in the fruit. So calcium is needed for cell growth, and the dark spot you see are dead cells. And so the first thing to know is that blossom end rot is more common early on in the season because young tomato plants are still developing their root systems and they may struggle to absorb calcium efficiently. Early on in spring, the soil can also be on the cooler side, which slows down root activity and reduces nutrient uptake. And then another common issue early on in the season is that many gardeners fertilize to boost growth, but too much nitrogen encourages leafy growth, not strong root development, which again can affect nutrient uptake. So first, make sure you're not fertilizing just for the sake of fertilizing. Only fertilize if you've had your soil tested and know which amendments, if any, are needed. And so if you end up seeing this early on in the season, just know that your plants might mature and it might just go away all on its own. However, if the season goes on and you're still struggling with blossom end rot, the only thing we know for a fact is that the fruit is deficient in calcium. And unless it's something simple like watering more consistently and adding mulch, it's not going to just be a quick fix. You need to get a soil test and test the pH of your soil. But you can spray a fast-acting calcium foliar spray, and this will help fix the issue. It's not going to fix your soil. It's not going to fix the fact that your plants have a nutrient uptake issue, but it is going to give your fruits the calcium they need to properly develop. And so what I would do is spray your plants with a calcium foliar spray, and then go get your soil tested, test the pH, and figure out the real cause. And definitely don't try fixing any calcium deficiencies by listening to the myths on the internet, like adding eggshells to your garden or Tums. Even though eggshells are a good source of calcium, they don't break down quickly, so they're not going to really do any help. And then unless you want to add hundreds, if not thousands of Tums to your garden, that's not going to make any difference either. All right, and then the next common problem is blossom drop, when the promising flowers fall off without making tomatoes. And before we go over what causes it, let's first cover some myths, because if you search on Google what's causing blossom drop and how do I fix it, these are typically the first things that come up. So the first myth is adding phosphorus for more blooms, which could be the issue, but unless your soil is actually deficient, extra phosphorus won't help. The only way to know is a soil test. The next myth is that plants need more pollinators, but tomatoes are self-pollinating. And so while pollinators might help boost yields, they're not essential. And then the last common myth is to use blossom set sprays, which can help earlier on in the season when temperatures are too cold for pollination, but later in the summer, they're not much use. And so the reason the plants are losing their blossoms could be from several different reasons. It's usually related to some kind of stress. The stress can be environmental or nutritional, or a combination of both. The first environmental cause is temperature extremes. Ideally, you want your daytime temps between 70 and 85 and nighttime temps between 55 and 75. But here's my experience. We got tomatoes all summer long in 100+ degree weather. I believe it could be due to the fact that our nights still cool down into the 60s and 70s, and we have low humidity. We don't have that combination of high heat and high humidity, which is more of an issue. And then the other thing is that I've worked really hard to build healthy soil. So when your soil is healthy, your plants are healthy, and they're going to be more likely to set fruit. So as a gardener, if you can just work on, helping your soil, that is going to prevent so many issues that you have in the garden. The next common cause of blossom drop is humidity. When humidity is too high, you get sticky pollen, and when it's too low, you get dry pollen that won't stick. Both can cause issues. The sweet spot is humidity between 40 and 70%. Another common issue could be a lack of water, which stresses the plants, which would cause them to drop their blooms. So remember that tomato plant roots are deep, and the soil should be consistently moist around the root zone. And so since we can't control the weather, the best prevention is to create the most stable environment you can, consistent watering, good airflow, great variety suited for your climate. Don't over-fertilize, and continuously work on building that healthy soil. And remember that some blossom drop is actually normal. So if you have a really great season earlier on, or if you have a lot of blooms all at once, the plant's going to automatically abort some of them. And now for, I think, probably my favorite part of today's presentation, which is taking you down memory lane by showing you tomato crops over the last 6 years and all of the lessons I've learned along the way. I think the best thing you can do is actually, learn from trial and error. And so I'm hoping that seeing some of these pictures will help you. So this very first photo is taken in May of 2019. We cleared out a horse pasture to make the garden bigger. Nothing had ever been planted here other than the weeds that were growing. So I knew it was probably going to be a work in progress, but it gave us so much more room for the tomato plants, which was great. So what we did is first we moved the fence back, then we ran a sprinkler for a few days to moisten the soil. And then we did go through and we tilled it up. It was so hard and compacted. I can't even imagine ever planting anything in that area. So we did till it that first year, but we have not tilled since. And then as soon as all that was ready, we set up the irrigation line and planted the tomatoes. One thing I have learned is that if I don't get the irrigation set up right at planting time, I will just end up telling myself, oh, I'm just going to water by hand. And then I don't get those transplants off to the best start possible because it gets tiring. It's a lot of plants to water, or you might miss a few days, and then there's that inconsistent watering that's going to lead to poor plant growth. So set up the irrigation right from the start. In this photo here, we are in July of 2019, and you can see we have pretty tall tomato plants with lots of foliage, but zero fruit. And even though we did not apply any fertilizer, my first thought is that this was likely from too much nitrogen. So the area that these tomato plants were planted in was horse pasture for 15 plus years, which means there was 15 plus years of horse manure in the soil. And they always stood right along the fence where this row of tomatoes is. And so my first thought is too much nitrogen. And if you look up close in this photo, you can see that one of the other, okay, sorry, I'm like jumping ahead. Okay. Besides the fact that there's lots of vegetative growth and no fruit, another sign that it could have been too much nitrogen is the fact that you see these curled leaves. So tomato leaf curl can be caused by various other stressors, but one of the causes is actually high nitrogen. And that was kind of my thought, but I never got my soil tested back then. So this is just all based on observation and things I've learned. However, another thing that can cause tomato leaf curl is high heat or high temperatures. And so that could have also been the issue, being that it was July. However, there are also diseases that cause leaf curl, such as curly top virus, which is spread by leaf hoppers. And during the same exact year, I actually talked with other gardeners who had similar leaf curl issues. And so it's always really nice to talk with other gardeners as well when you see an issue in your garden, because it's very likely that you weren't the only one experiencing that problem, which is going to make it a little bit easier to solve. So I'm thinking high nitrogen, but we're not for sure. But this is an example of why the very best time to start improving your soil is now, and why you should never give up. I planted at the same time in the same exact row, but 6 years later, my soil was healthy, and the image on the right is proof. So let's jump ahead from 2019 to 2020. I couldn't find an earlier season photo, but judging on the jungle of tomatoes I'm seeing with no fruit, it was probably still an excess of nitrogen in the soil. But the thing to note is that even though I had 2 years in a row of unsuccessful harvests, the plants were still serving a great purpose. They were using up the extra nitrogen in the soil, and you need living roots to build a healthy soil microbiome. And now by the summer of 2021, I finally got tomatoes. The plants don't really look as healthy as I think they should, but at least there was fruit for the first time. Now onto the spring of 2022. I planted a little bit earlier this year than I normally do because my son's due date was the end of April. Judging by the look of these plants, they look pretty healthy. The one issue I do see is that I didn't put down mulch, but I'm going to blame it on being pregnant and not wanting to be out there. And now by June, I had my son out in the garden. I had big bunches of tomatoes. You can't really see them, but I have that little arrow pointing to lots of green tomatoes. And then this was also the same summer that we harvested 70 pounds of Romas from just 6 plants. It was incredibly rewarding and very exciting. We got to make sauce finally. And now for the year 2023 of failed pruning. So being in the online space, I always want to test things out personally before I teach about it. And so I thought I would test how well tomatoes grow if I pruned them. And so I went out and pruned my tomatoes to single stake tomatoes and take into consideration that prior to this, I had really done minimal pruning. So, I kind of had these big wild plants. I didn't really do much pruning, but at least I had foliage that could protect the fruit. So this photo was in June, and this photo was a month later in July. The plants really barely grew, and the fruit is completely exposed to the sun. And then this is the end of August, and the plants had barely grown. It was another unfortunate year for tomatoes. But one important thing to also take note of during this year is that in 2023, we flooded. We had a crazy amount of rain. And so I believe that it could have affected our soil as well, but the pruning definitely didn't help. And then by the end of that September, though, at least the sun gold cherry tomato started taking off, and my son Cooper had his new favorite treat. So there was one plus side. And then now for the year that I was always hoping for, the only thing I did in 2024 was spread a thin layer of compost prior to planting. I mulched my tomato plants with shredded leaves from fall, and we also built the cattle panel arch, which provided incredible support. So I planted on April 24th, and 2 months later, the plants were halfway up the arch with an incredible crop of both red and green tomatoes. And then here's another view from the inside. And one of the other factors that I believe really helped contribute to the success this last year was the diversity of crops that I planted near my tomatoes. So the cattle panel arch didn't just provide great support for the tomatoes, it also gave me a really great way to grow lots of different plants vertically. And so on the one side, I had tomatoes, but on the other side, I had yard-long beans, tomatillos, cucumbers, various types of squash, watermelon, marigolds, and nasturtiums. And then on the inside, I planted sweet basil and sweet alyssum. And earlier this week, John Kempf discussed this in much better detail, but he talks about the fact that you can encourage more diversity in your soil by growing different plant families in close proximity to each other to encourage root mingling. And this is important because plants function best with a diversity of microbes surrounding their root systems, which provide the benefits of nutrient availability, enhanced yield, plant vigor, and protection from disease and environmental stresses, which is exactly what I experienced in my 2024 tomato crop. And I believe earlier in the presentation, I mentioned that we harvested tomatoes for 6 months straight. And so this is showing that we're still harvesting in July. This is at the end of August. The plants were making their way up and over the arch, and we were still harvesting tomatoes. And then here we are in October with both red and green tomatoes. And then here we are on November 14th, which was my last great harvest of the season before it started getting too cold and changing the flavor of the tomatoes. And so if I could leave you with a few of my best tips, it's to start improving your soil now. Paul and Edwin did such an incredible job of getting so many experts to teach us here at the Seed to Harvest Summit on how to build healthy soil. And so definitely watch those replays. The next thing is to plant a large diversity of different plants from various plant families. As I look back over the 6 years, I did not interplant with various crops. I just planted my tomatoes, and each year really didn't grow that great, mainly because my staking system was not effective. And as the tomato plants got bigger, they would end up choking out other plants. And so I never really grew anything else close by. And lastly, an easy task that could have helped protect my soil would have been to add mulch. In the last few years prior to 2024, I was in the season of being a new mom, And a lot of the tasks just got pushed to the back burner, but adding mulch shouldn't have been one. And so I hope that you enjoyed this. I really enjoyed diving deep into each season and just kind of looking over mistakes and how we can improve things. I have one last slide for you. I created a free guide for you to help you this season. It's the top tomato growing mistakes to avoid with actionable solutions to help you have your most successful harvest this year. If you head to the URL, audreyslittlefarm.com/tomatoes, you can grab your free copy. I believe there's also a button below this presentation, but I just took all of the biggest mistakes from today's presentation with best solutions to help you. So thank you so much, and I hope this was helpful.
Thank you, Audrey. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Very, very thorough. I love it. I think that you hit it out of the park with growing tomatoes A to Z. We do have tons of questions here, so
Perfect.
Let's dive into some of them.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start with this one from the top. What are the best tips for increased productivity, please? Now, you kind of covered some of this in your session already, but anything else that you would add specifically to that?
So I think, I don't think I could have gone back to 2019 and really done anything different. That soil was just not good. I think I needed those 2 years, of getting rid of excess nitrogen, possibly, improving the soil microbiome and kind of bringing that soil back to life. So I don't think anything in those first 2 years. But once that soil kind of started improving, I think if I would have planted a larger diversity of crops, that could have maybe helped like the health of my tomatoes. And I think that, going forward now, seeing my success in 2024 with all the different crops around the tomato plants and how well they grew, I think doing that sooner definitely could have helped.
Fantastic.
So I think several people were asking about rotating your tomatoes, and especially now that you've got this cattle panel, is that going to stay in place there or
yeah, it's totally permanent. So I don't plan on rotating the tomatoes just because I don't have another good place to grow them. I guess I could rotate from like one side to the other, so I might do that, but I personally don't feel that could be that much of a difference from planting on one side to the other. And so I have talked with lots of other local gardeners that have been growing tomatoes in the same spot for 20 plus years and having still great success. I think, in my opinion, just feeding the soil each season and replacing the nutrients is good. And I have had no pest issues, even with not rotating the crops. Obviously, when the soil wasn't very good, I had all kinds of issues. But this last year, I had no pest problems. Everything grew really well. And so I guess I'll just kind of judge it on how each season goes.
Sounds good. All right. What are some indeterminate breeds? You mentioned a few, but there were people that were wondering. I'm going to share bundle a few questions here together. They were wondering, how do I know if a breed is determinate or indeterminate? Like, if I have the packet, is it going to say on the packet? How do I figure that out? And maybe just a few indeterminate breeds that you like.
Yeah, perfect. So first thing is like the packet should say, so if you go to an online seed store, like the Seed Time store, and you find a packet of seeds, it should tell you if it's a determinate type tomato or an indeterminate. And if it doesn't, then you could just always Google that name, and say, for example, is Better Boy indeterminate? Is Roma determinate, or vice versa? So you can always Google, but the packet should say. I have found that a lot of local garden centers don't actually show that on the tag. So like if you are buying your transplants at your local nursery and you don't see that, you could just, real quick, pull up your phone, look up the variety before buying it, just to make sure you're getting the variety that you want. A few indeterminate varieties would be your Early Girls, Better Boys, Beefmaster. Lots of heirlooms are indeterminate, like your Black Krim, San Marizanos. Trying to think now. I'm trying to think and can't think. The Sun Gold cherry tomatoes I showed, the Sweet 100s. What else do we have? Celebrity tomatoes. So I would say, in my opinion, a lot of the tomatoes I see locally sold are indeterminate. But then there's a few, I guess, determinate. I feel like indeterminate is more popular. But you should always look up the variety if you're not sure. And the same would go if you're really wanting to grow in a smaller container. You would definitely be better off with a smaller determinate type. So do your research and just make sure you're buying that right variety.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right. Another question here. Christine, how many plants can you fit in a 4x6 bed? We're testing the math skills here, Audrey.
I'm just going to say, I know that like the raised beds that I have are 4 feet by 8 feet, and I only planted 3 tomato plants in one bed. And they still didn't grow as well as they did, like giving them more space. So it does depend on the type. So the determinate types can be a little bit closer together. You can get away with about 2 feet in between plants. I know a lot of gardeners, I always like read these forums and they're like, oh, I planted my tomato plants 12 inches apart and they grow just fine. But I would be willing to bet that they probably didn't grow as well as they would have if they would have been given 2 feet. So I just think more space is better. You could see in those photos I was showing, one plant has the potential to really get massive and produce a ton of tomatoes. And so if you give it lots of space, it's going to grow healthier. But I get that, like, if you don't have very much space, you don't want to just put one tomato plant in a raised bed. But what you could do is plant one tomato plant in a few, like say you had 4 raised beds, you could plant 2 tomatoes in each bed and then mix with some other crops. So kind of like interplant with other things near your tomatoes, so you get like the best of both worlds.
Yeah. So Pat's wondering, how can you get rid of blight in your tomatoes?
I honestly don't have a solution off the top of my head for that. We have not dealt with blight. I want to say I feel like blight is more common in more humid climates. I think that is correct. And we do not have high humidity, and so I have never experienced blight, and so I can't give an honest, solution for that just because we don't experience it. I do know I'm pretty sure you can spray like fungal sprays to maybe treat that, but I would say also then like the root solution would be building healthy soil to have that healthy plant. But that takes years.
Welcome to Tennessee, where blight is our issue here.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've found is that finding varieties that are resistant to it really makes a big difference. And growing grafted tomatoes that are grafted on a root stock that's resistant, that can make a big difference as well.
Okay.
All right. Valerie here says, if my soil was diseased, can I amend and reuse it or just dump it? I'm not sure if this is in a container or if it's out in her garden.
Yeah. I guess let's go like the simple route. If it's in a container and it's diseased, it'd be probably better to start with fresh soil. But if it's in I guess maybe same thing with raised bed, but I do think it's like sometimes it's worth just like you can grow crops for the sake of not really expecting a harvest, but just to kind of like clear things out of the soil. But not so much with disease, I guess. So like I'm kind of referring back to like the excess nitrogen I think I had. It took me like growing crops in that soil to get rid of some of that nitrogen. But with disease, you maybe should just start fresh if you're in a container, I would say. But if it's in ground, I think you just need to work on amending it.
Yeah. All right. Next question here. How do you get strong seedling plants to transplant? So this is going back to starting your seedlings.
So what I typically do is I have found one of the things like that works good for us is not starting them way too soon where I have to have them under grow lights for a really long time. So I used to start my seedlings like really super early, like late December, early January, just because I was like eager to get my seedlings started. But then the weather when it came time to when our average last frost date would approach, it wasn't actually really time to plant outside. So I'd have to repot them again, keep on keeping them under grow lights. Like it was just kind of a mess. And so I learned to start my seedlings actually a little later. So I usually now start in mid-February. And granted, I'm here in the Central Valley of California. My growing times are going to be different, depending on where you are. But I just plant a little bit later in the season. And so I start my seedlings a little bit later. So then as soon as the seedlings start growing, I usually will repot just once to let them get a little bit bigger. And then I'm ready to transplant outside. The weather's plenty warm enough. So I think just not keeping them in little pots longer than they need to be is one tip. And that's probably going to mean maybe starting your seedlings possibly a little bit later than you normally do. One of the other tips is make sure they're getting lots of, lots of light. So a lot of people end up like wanting to start their seedlings maybe in a windowsill. and the plants are just stretching for light and they're getting leggy and weak. So providing a really good light source is another good tip. But then it always comes down to, you know, good quality seeds and potting soil and all the things that go along with it. It's kind of hard to tell like what is the reason for those healthy seedlings, but I think the sooner you could get them out into the garden, being that the conditions are right, that is what has worked for us.
Excellent.
Great. Christy's wondering what kind of trellis system would you suggest for indeterminate tomatoes in a raised bed?
So you could still do, well, what I actually did, and I didn't take any photos of this because it wasn't related to my tomatoes, but we did the same similar cattle panel arch along like 2 raised beds. So we have our, you know, 2 raised beds side by side, and we made the arch go from one raised bed to the other. And you could then plant tomatoes like on each side of that arch. And that's what I would do if you had 2 raised beds. You could make that arch, and that would be a really great support system. But you could also do a cattle panel, just a single panel vertically in that raised bed, and put tomato plants along that, and that would be really sturdy. You could use stakes, but the cattle panels are just my new favorite thing, whether you do the arch or just set them up vertically, just because they're so sturdy and they don't fall over. They're tall enough that the plants can at least keep growing for a while, or if it is the arch, they can grow up and over.
Excellent.
Yeah.
About the cattle panel arch, we had several people asking how tall is it? And well, let's start out with that. How tall is it when it's...
Yeah, so it is, I want to say, I think the cattle panel, like the width of it is like, I'm trying to think, they're 8 foot, 16 foot panels maybe. So like if they were on the soil, which we actually picked them up off the soil like a foot, and then like tied them to attached them to the T-post, and then did the arch. So I believe that like in the middle, it's like 7.5 feet tall, which is way taller than me. I'm only 5'2". So like those tomatoes at the top, I need a little step stool. But what was really cool is it gave like this, it gives the plants just so much room to grow. And then it helps shade things actually underneath. So I was able to get away with planting some other crops that kind of needed a little bit of shade during the summer. But I know I'm getting kind of off topic. So if you were just going to use a regular cattle panel and it was touching the soil, I believe it makes it like 6 feet tall, maybe. I'm probably doing my math wrong. I can't remember the size of the panel, but it's whatever the length of the panel would be, and you divide that in half.
Bent over. Sure. Yeah. And how many tomatoes per cattle panel? I think people are wondering just like how strong they are.
So I just did 1 plant per cattle panel, which I know like it looks like you're wasting so much space at planting time, but by the end of the season, everything had grown into each other. Everything was going up and over. And so I did, so if I'm trying to think, I did the center of each cattle panel. So it ended up being about like a little over 4 feet between each plant. It was under 5 feet, a little over 4 feet, but the plants just grew incredible, and like nothing was crowded, but everything ended up growing into each other still. So it was like giving them an extra room to grow just made them grow bigger. If I would have crammed more in, I just think it wouldn't have been quite as good of a harvest possibly.
Yeah.
So I'm tempted to throw in my own question here.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I've been wondering, do you have a recipe or a plan for transplanting? You know, we saw the holes that you dug, but do you put anything special in those holes, or how do you do that?
In years past, I would use a organic starter fertilizer. I think the brand that I used for a long time was EB Stone, possibly, and it's like the granular like starter fertilizer. And I did that in all the years past, but this last year I didn't actually use anything. So then it makes me wonder, like maybe that starter fertilizer was not good for my plants, which probably wasn't the case. I think my soil was I think it just took a lot of years to get life back in that soil. And so this last year, all I did was I did start my own seedlings. I started them in mid-February out in our greenhouse, and I repotted them once at like beginning of April, and they really like took off. Like as soon as I repotted them, they got really big. I say really big, but way bigger than they were. And then the weather was finally ready for them to go outside. So it was the end of April when I transplanted, and then I just planted them deep, like up to that first tomato branch. And I didn't add any, I'm almost positive I did no starter fertilizer. I just did that thin layer of compost on top of the soil.
Awesome.
Very good.
Love it.
Mm.
All right. Let's do one last question here. Oh, let me see. Which one should we do? Where do you get your drip irrigation?
So I actually have, well, we have a local store. If you're here in the Central Valley, it's Exeter Irrigation, but there's lots of, local irrigation stores probably where you are. But I was able to find a store online called Drip Depot that carried all of the same supplies that I am able to find at my local store. So I was getting that question all the time of like, where do I get, XYZ? And I really like the parts that I'm personally using in the garden. And so I was doing my research, found the store online called Drip Depot. I do have like a free checklist of all the irrigation parts I use. And if you go to audreyslittlefarm.com and probably type in irrigation, I think it probably should pop up. But if not, you could always send me an email or like message me on Instagram or something. But if you just search Drip Depot, you'll find that store. But if you want the exact parts list, I do have that somewhere. I don't know where it's at the moment.
No worries. Fantastic. That's excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent resource. Wow. Well, let's give Audrey a hand. Audrey, thank you for joining
Thank
us.
you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Really
This was
good.
awesome.
Do you have any last minute words of wisdom you want to share with everyone before we wrap up?
Let's see. I guess we're in February. So I think a lot of people, I know this also totally depends on people's season. It's really hard to give timeframes, but I feel like you can't, if you have a long-ish growing season, and you're not getting your first freeze on September 1st, even if you're late planting tomatoes, you still have so much time because they're a warm season crop. So I feel like I get people come to me all the time and it's only June and they're like, oh, I can't plant a summer garden because it's too late. But even in June, you still have 3 full months of warm weather ahead, if not more. So I would just say, like, even if you're late, plant. And then with tomatoes, usually what I have found is planting too soon causes more trouble just because it's not quite warm enough. So don't be late. You can still get a tomato harvest pretty much, whenever you plant, if you have a long growing season. So don't miss your chance to have a good crop.
Excellent. Good
Yeah.
tips. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thanks so much. Look forward.
Thank you guys. Have a good day.
Yeah. You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow, what a great session with Audrey on growing tomatoes from A to Z.
Yeah.
I think that's the best presentation I've seen walking through each step through the whole way.
Ready to go plant some tomatoes.
I know. I want tomatoes too. All right. So as you know, here at Seed Time, our mission is to make gardening and farming easier for you. That's what we do this summit for. And we hope that you take these tips and principles and go apply them into your life. Also, people are always wondering about the replay. I saw someone in the chat that was saying, I've got to come back and rewatch this one so I can take better notes. And we do have the replays available for a limited time. You'll see the link at the top of this page. Otherwise, for those of you that may be wondering, how can I own the summit myself? I'd love to be able to come back and review these all the time. Maybe there's other sessions that you've missed. You want to come back and get them. We do have something special that we are offering right now during the summit, and that is that you can get $100 off lifetime access to the Seed to Harvest Summit recordings right now. And we have something new that we just released today because we were listening to you. We've had multiple people contacting us and saying, can we do it in a split payment plan? I want to be able to grab the recordings, but I just need to be able to split it up. So we have launched some new split payment options as well. So I wanted to walk just very quickly through a quick recap of everything that comes with your summit recordings when you grab those. We have 2 packages. We have a platinum package and a gold package. With both of them, you get lifetime online access to the recordings of the summit, all 21 presentations, and then we're going to split those out and include MP3 audio versions of those, so that if you like to listen to things on the go podcast style, you can easily do that as well. You can listen to them while you're gardening or while you're on the road. We're also going to split out the transcripts. This is going to make it very easy for you to easily read and skim through the presentations, especially if you're more of a visual, a reader versus a watcher of videos. We are also going to split out on top of that and add in, I should say, the live chat log sessions, because there's so much great wisdom that you all are adding to this, to the summit as well. You'll be able to go back and look through those chat logs and kind of save the live feel to a certain extent, even in the recordings. And then at the platinum level, for those of you that are interested in it, we are going to be sending you a physical flash drive to your door with all of the summit recordings. So if you like to have that physical copy in hand, this is a great way to get digital and physical together at the platinum level. In addition to that, here at Seed Time, we don't want to just give you expert training and insights and tips and tricks, but we also want to give you tools to put it into practice. And so here at Seed Time, we have developed a garden planner called the Seed Time Garden Planner. Makes it extremely easy to visualize what to do, when to do it in your garden, and not be flying by the seat of your pants through your season. And so as a bonus to both of the packages, we are including 1 year of paid level access to the Seed Time Garden Planner with some pretty awesome bells and whistles. With Seed Time, you get a calendar based on your location. You set it up, it pulls your average frost dates, and then you can add crops to your calendar. You click the green Add Crop button up at the top right. You can choose which crop you want to grow. And then Seed Time will automatically give you suggested timings for that crop, when to seed it, when to transplant it, an expected harvest time. You click schedule and it schedules the crop planting into your calendar. And then here's the power of Seed Time, is that it's completely adjustable from there. You can move that planting around. You can add succession plantings. You can put plantings in the spring, in the fall, through the summer, all year round. And you can plan out your entire season in your gardening calendar. Once you have your season planned out in the calendar, you can come over to the layout planner, lay out your garden beds, and then place those plants where they're going to be growing in your garden based on the time that they're going to take up space. So you can watch this little green slider up at the top here and watch the plants down in the garden below as we move through time. You'll see those plants coming in and out as we have planned for them to be taking up space when they take up space. So you can track both time and space in your garden. And what that does is it allows you to see what times of the year there are spaces that are open in your garden that you could plant something else in, maybe put in a cover crop. And it really helps you maximize the space in your garden, which ultimately means that it helps you maximize the yield from your garden as well. In addition to that, you'll get the task list that makes it really easy to stay on task. It automatically pulls a task list from your calendar. You can check those off and adjust your plantings on the fly. And you'll also get the journal where you can easily keep your notes and observations. You can log journal entries with pictures and link them to specific plantings and come search filter them later on the go as well. In addition to that, with Seed Time, we don't have slides for them here, but you'll also get the classroom and the community and the Seed Time store, where you get 20% off all seed packet orders in the Seed Time store as well. So in addition to the Seed Time Garden Planner, at the platinum level here, we have a few extra little bonuses for you. The first one here is 1 year of free online access to our flagship home gardening course. This is 12 modules over 18 hours of video training with worksheets and teaching and demonstration videos, walking you step by step through how to trellis your plants. We have some videos in there on trellising tomatoes, how to start your starts, how to transplant successfully, how to deal with weeds without being out there for hours with a dinner knife trying to dig them out, how to extend your season without losing your shirt doing it at the same time. So there's so much that is in there in that home gardening course. It's $120. We're throwing it in for free, 1 year of access to the home gardening course. And in addition to that, we're also going to be giving a bonus sponsor session recordings. These are a $50 value. They're extra exclusive sponsor session recordings that aren't aired during the main portion of this summit. One of them is the microbiometer, where they share about the microbial life in your soil, how that interacts with the plants, and then how you can use a simple little tool to test the microbial life in your soil to figure out how much bacteria, how much fungi is in my soil. Also, Diego Footer from Modern Grower shares on season extension and using tunnels and covers and a comprehensive guide to how you can extend your season with simple methods. And then we have one more special bonus at the platinum level as well, and that is bonus exclusive unaired garden trainings. These are trainings that are not available at all. We're not sharing them at all during the summit, but they are only available during the platinum at the platinum level. We had so many, we filled up all of our speaking slots, and then we had other speakers that were like, yes, come on, we'd love to have you as well. And they agreed to add these special unaired sessions that you can get at the platinum level. These include Michael Kilpatrick sharing about growing ginger and turmeric. Very neat. If you haven't grown ginger and turmeric before, you may want to give it a try. And then also James Fry, a friend of mine who grows a Revolution garden. He shows how his Revolution garden bed grows food 2 times faster than a regular raised garden bed here. It's kind of crazy. And he walks you through the whole process and why it does what it does. It's pretty neat. So you may be wondering, how can I grab my access to the summit recordings to own this for life and not have the stress of trying to catch all the replays? Because if you're anything like us, life is busy, right? So there are the 2 options here, the platinum and the gold. The platinum level at full price is $298. However, during the summit, you can get $100 off for just one payment of $198. And as I mentioned earlier, we just recently released a split payment plan where you can now get it split up into 4 payments of $49.95. We do not want to leave anyone behind. We want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be able to grab these. At the gold level, full price is $198. But once again, during the summit here, you can get $100 off for just one payment of $98. Or you can split it up into 4 payments of $25. Again, we want to take away any barrier of entry for you to jump in. We don't want finances to stand in your way of actually owning the summit and being able to come back and review this information and use it in your garden year after year. So our team has posted a link up in the chat, or you can go to seedtoharvestsummit.com/lifetime, or there should be a button below this video as well, where you can jump on over and grab your lifetime access to the summit recordings and packages. We also do want to just note that we do back it up with our 30-day money-back guarantee. So either the summit adds so much value to your garden, Seed Time makes it so much easier to plan and stay on task during your season, or within the first 30 days, come back and shoot us a message and we'll back you up 100%. Otherwise, friends, now is the time to take your garden to the skies. It's the beginning of the year. It's the start of the main gardening season. And so it's time to get excited about growing your best garden ever. Linda says, I've never had such great vegetables. Let's jump down to Scott here. So it says, by far, our best garden ever, 22 pounds of today's harvest. And my crazy garden has been amazing this year. It grew in size and abundance. Joelle, so much produce. Roy Kim here. There was a noticeable difference in the amount of fruitage this year compared to last year. If you'd like that kind of help and these types of results, then this is what we are excited about. And this is why we are offering you the option to jump in and grab and own the package of the summits as well. For CJ, speaking specifically about Seed Time, says, I now have a clear plan of what to do when. Kim says, my fall and winter garden last year was the best ever because the guesswork of when to plant was simplified and so easy. You know, we found that a lot of people struggle with figuring out what to do and when to do it in their garden. And it can be stressful and overwhelming when you're going through your season and you're constantly trying to guess and you have that guesswork of, man, what should I be doing now? And this is exactly what Seed Time was built for, to take away that stress and overwhelm. And replace it with a simple checklist that just automatically keeps you on track and makes it a lot simpler and easier. So I'm not going to read through all the rest of these right now, but I'll leave this slide up here for a second for those of you that want to grab the QR code there or go to the link. And let's see if we have some final questions here before we wrap up this session. I see Kurt says, is there a package to get access to everything, including past and future summits, like a lifetime pass to everything? We do not currently have a all access lifetime pass to everything that all of the summits that we've ever done or will ever do. But that's an idea. We might think about doing that. Sarah says, does the Seed Time Garden Planner work in Africa? Yes, Sarah. Seed Time Garden Planner can work in Africa. We have people using it all over the world. It is primarily like built so far for the Northern Hemisphere, but you can use it in the Southern Hemisphere and you can use it in tropical climates as well. You may just need to do a little bit more manual adjustment of the timings. It would not have as much of the automated recommendations of timings are based on your frost dates. And if you don't have frost dates, then that could skew things a little bit. So, but you can still add those plantings to your calendar, move them to where you want them, and set up your entire schedule. Just maybe a little bit more on the manual side. Dad, did you see any other questions that?
I think those were the main ones.
All right. Those are the main ones for now. Well, coming up very soon on the hour, we're going to have another session here with Bootstrap Farmer, with Randy Cummings from Bootstrap Farmer. And you're not going to want to miss it. It's about starting starts and starting starts that thrive. So come back at the hour and we'll look forward to seeing you there. All right. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.